It's disgusting to have an animal in a restaurant, you should be ashamed. That's what she screamed at a man who'd given 30 years of his life in uniform. Why would she attack a veteran and his service dog? At a veteran who needed his service dog just to breathe through the noise of the world. The room fell silent, no one stood up, no one spoke, but in that stillness, something powerful stirred. How would dignity respond to this outrage? Because respect isn't loud, it's not always a headline, sometimes. It's a quiet dog lying at a soldier's feet and a community remembering what gratitude really means. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The Delaware coast breathed a quiet rhythm that evening. Soft waves lapped against the harbor docks. Families strolled the boardwalk. The glow of neon crab signs flickered to life as the sun dipped below the line of boats. Inside Red Rock Seafood Grill, the air smelled of buttered lobster and Old Bay seasoning. Dinner service was in full swing. Forks clinked, conversations hummed, glasses lifted in quiet toasts. At a corner table near the windows, Bill Austin sat with his wife, Janet, and a few close friends. He didn't speak much, never had. 30 years in the army had made him that way. Iraq, Afghanistan, places most folks only knew from headlines. But tonight wasn't about stories. Tonight was supposed to be simple: a good meal, good company, a break from the noise inside his head. At Bill's feet, lying still as stone, was JP, a massive Great Dane with calm, knowing eyes. His service vest was bright and clear. PTSD service dog. Do not distract. The restaurant's management had seen the vest. They'd welcomed JP, and without a second glance, Bill had thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Across the dining room at a smaller table by the bar, a woman in a white blouse and designer scarf had noticed JP. She'd been watching since the Austins arrived, disapproving, shifting in her seat, whispering to her companion. Her name was Sierra Miller, and for reasons only she understood, that service dog was about to ruin her evening. She stood up, walked straight across the dining room. Her heels struck the tile with sharp, deliberate clicks. When she reached Bill's table, she didn't lower her voice. What is that dog doing in here? She demanded, hand on her hip. This is a restaurant, a place where people eat, not a kennel. The room hushed, forks paused midair, conversation stuttered, chairs stopped scraping. Janet blinked, startled. Bill looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. That's my service dog, ma'am, he said, voice low, calm. He's allowed to be here, Sierra scoffed, turning to gesture wildly at the dining room. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting to have an animal inside where people are eating. You should be ashamed. JP didn't move. He'd heard worse, so had Bill, but Sierra wasn't finished. I don't care what your vest says, she snapped, finger jabbing toward JP. It's unsanitary. You people think you're above the rules because you throw on a military cap and bring a mutt into public spaces. It's pathetic. The word hung in the air. Pathetic. Janet's hand tightened around her wineglass. Bill's friends sat frozen, uncertain whether to rise or remain seated, but Bill didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. And ma'am, he said evilly, this dog helps me manage my PTSD. He's trained. He's not a threat to you or anyone else here. Sierra's lip curled. I don't care about your excuses. This is a public health violation. You're putting people at risk. Her voice climbed, shrill, sharp, loud enough now that every table in the restaurant was watching. Phones appeared. Someone pressed record, and yet Bill stayed seated. That was when Sierra crossed the line. You people always play the veteran card, she sneered. I've had enough of it. Maybe if you didn't want pity, you'd stop parading around with your injuries on display. There it was. A hush deeper than silence swept through the restaurant. A few tables away, a family quietly stood and gathered their coats, not because of the dog, but because they'd seen what was happening, and it wasn't the dog causing discomfort. Sierra's companion tugged her sleeve, whispering urgently, but Sierra wouldn't be moved. I shouldn't have to eat my dinner next to a filthy animal, she shouted. If management won't do their job, then I'll take my business elsewhere. She spun on her heel, her voice echoed as she stormed toward the exit. Absolutely disgusting. The door slammed behind her, so the glass shuttered. The restaurant remained still. Bill sat motionless, staring down at his hands. Janet reached across the table, her fingers brushing his knuckles. JP shifted slightly, a slow, deliberate movement. His head rested gently against Bill's boot. The moment passed. The manager approached, face pale, apologies spilling out. Bill waved him off. It's done, he said quietly. Let people finish their meals. But the moment wasn't over. Not really. What would happen when the video went viral? By the time Bill and Janet finished their dinner, the video was already climbing the internet ranks. A shaky cell phone recording of Sierra's outburst, her words, her finger jabbing toward a quiet man and his service dog. It wasn't long before Sierra's version of the story appeared online. In a statement to a local newspaper, she claimed the video had been selectively edited. She insisted she'd been provoked, that racial slurs had been used against her. There's more to this than what that video shows, she said. I was attacked verbally. That man and his friends were incredibly disrespectful, but the witnesses told a different story, and the camera doesn't blink. In the days to follow, news outlets picked up the incident, social media erupted, veterans groups rallied, disability advocates spoke out. The core of it remains simple: one man, one dog, one woman's refusal to see beyond herself, and Bill Austin, as always, chose to stay quiet. For him, the battle had never been about shouting, it was about standing firm with dignity, with patience, the same way he always had it. The noise outside grew louder, but at Bill Austin's table, there was only quiet. Janet reached for his hand. Again, her fingers gentle, but her grip steady. Their friends, Frank, a fellow veteran from the old unit, and Lisa, Janet's cousin, sat frozen, unsure how to process what had just unfolded. But Bill, he remained still. He had seen worse than angry women in restaurants, yet somehow, this moment stung differently. Later that night, seated in the worn recliner of his small living room, Bill watched the video again, not by choice. It was everywhere now, shared, reposted, hashtagged, veteran harassed for service. Dog woman screams at Marine with PTSD. The headlines came fast, but they missed something. Bill didn't want to be a headline, he never had to. Janet sat beside him, scrolling through the comments. Some were supportive, many were angry on his behalf, but Bill's eyes kept drifting to the face on the screen, his own stoic, silent, jaw clenched, but voice calm. I've had folks ask about JP before, he said quietly. Most are curious, some don't understand. That's fine, we explain, we move on. He sighed, rubbing his temples, but I've never had someone scream in my face like that, not here, not at home. Janet's hand rested on his arm. You did nothing wrong, Bill, I know, he replied, but knowing didn't make it easier. To outsiders, JP was just a dog, a large, impressive animal with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, but to Bill, he was more than that. He was a lifeline. When the nightmares came, when sand and blood and echoes of gunfire clawed their way into the present, JP was there, a nudge of the muzzle, a heavy paw, anchoring him back to reality, steady breathing against his side until his own lungs remembered how. He senses it before I do, Bill said softly, almost to himself. The panic, the way the walls close in. He knows, the dog saved my life more times than I can count. Janet's throat tightened. She knew it was true. Behind the uniform, behind the polite smiles, Bill carried battles no one saw. PTSD wasn't a visible wound, but it was relentless, and JP was the one constant that could break its grip. So to see that bond reduced to disgusting by a stranger's careless words, it cut deeper than any headline could capture. The days that followed blurred together. Media calls, messages from advocacy groups, interviews requested, politely but persistently. Bill declined them all. I'm not looking for a spotlight, he told Frank during one of their morning coffee runs. I just want people to understand, JP isn't a pet, he's my partner, my safety net. Frank, a Marine to his core, nodded grimly. You shouldn't have to explain that, but if your story helps folks learn, maybe it's worth it. Janet agreed unreluctantly. Bill consented to one interview with a local veterans outreach program, not a flashy network, just a quiet sit-down, a conversation. The interviewer asked gently, how do you stay so calm, Sergeant Austin, after everything? Bill thought for a long moment, because losing control, it never helps. When you've seen lives lost in seconds, you learn the value of staying still, of listening, even when the world's shouting at you. He paused, glancing down at JP, resting loyally by his side, and because of him, he added, this dog doesn't just keep me grounded, he reminds me I'm not broken, just different. The interview resonated, shared quietly at first, then louder. Veterans across the country commented, sharing their own stories. Service dogs, silent battles, the unseen weight of trauma. For every voice raised in support, there was another person learning, understanding, seeing. But beneath the growing attention, Bill wrestled with a deeper hurt. I didn't expect a parade when I came home, he told Janet one night. Didn't want one, but I thought maybe there'd be respect, or at least understanding. He shook his head, bitterness creeping into his tone. To be treated like an inconvenience, like my wounds, my reality, are something people get to be disgusted by, that's a hard thing. Janet reached for his hand again, holding it tight. You've given more to this country than most people ever will, she said, voice trembling, and no scream in a restaurant can take that from you. Bill didn't respond right away, but his grip tightened just slightly. The community began to rally in unexpected ways. The restaurant owner issued a public statement reaffirming support for veterans and service animals. Local schools invited veterans to speak about their experiences. Advocacy groups used Bill's story as a teaching moment. A moment of ignorance had sparked a wave of awareness, and slowly Bill began to see it. It wasn't about Sierra Miller anymore, it was about every veteran walking into a public space, unsure if they'd be judged for the dog at their side, about every quiet warrior carrying invisible wounds. Bill never wanted fame, but if this moment could ease the path for someone else, if it could make one person pause, reconsider, and offer empathy instead of outrage, then maybe it was worth the discomfort. One evening, as the sun sank low over their modest backyard, Bill sat with JP at his feet, watching the world turn gold. Janet came outside, a cup of tea in hand, and sat beside him. You're quiet tonight, she said softly. Bill smiled faintly, just thinking about Fallujah, about brothers I lost, about how I made it home, but parts of me never really did. He reached down, fingers brushing JP's broad head. But this one, this stubborn mutt, he keeps finding those pieces for me, one breath at a time. The house behind them glowed warm in the evening light, safe, Steady outside, the noise continued, online debates, news segments, opinions shared into the void, but here, in this quiet moment, Bill found something that Sierra Miller's anger had failed to take from him: dignity, still intact, still standing, and as JP nuzzled closer, as Janet rested her head against his shoulder, Bill understood one simple truth: respect isn't measured by the loudest voice in the room, it's measured by the quiet strength to endure, and in that, Bill had already won. The ripple had become a wave. Within 48 hours. Bill Austin's quiet stand at Red Rock Seafood Grill wasn't just local news, it had become a national conversation. Veterans groups across the country shared the video. They didn't shout, they didn't rant, they simply posted it with words that spoke volumes. This is why we fight for service dog rights. PTSD doesn't need your permission to exist, dignity is non-negotiable. And with every share, every retweet, came more stories. A Marine in Kansas wrote about being refused service because his Labrador wore a vest. An Army nurse from Virginia recalled the stares when her mobility dog rode the subway. Parents of a young veteran struggling with TBI spoke of how strangers would lecture them about no dogs allowed signs. The floodgates opened. Bill never asked for this spotlight, but now the weight of a shared truth had found him, and it was heavier than expected. Meanwhile, Sierra Miller tried to rewrite the story. Local papers carried her statement: the video is misleading. I was subjected to racial slurs that were conveniently edited out. My reaction was justified given the level of disrespect I endured, but eyewitnesses pushed back. Patrons at Red Rock Grill, young couples, retirees, even a middle school teacher spoke up. Interviews, sworn statements, quiet posts. No one insulted her, no one raised their voice except her. That veteran, the gentleman, never even stood up. Security footage reviewed by management confirmed it. No racial slurs, no provocation, just a calm man with his dog and a woman who couldn't handle the sight of either. The truth was clear, but Sierra wouldn't let go. She appeared on a local morning show, flanked by a defense attorney known more for noise than nuance. We need to have an honest conversation about public health, Sierra said, voice carefully measured. Her attorney added, this is about sanitation, about safety, not disrespect. But the audience wasn't buying it. The comments section beneath the livestream was brutal. It's not about dogs, it's about your prejudice. You attacked a veteran and now you're playing victim? PTSD service dogs save lives. You tried to humiliate a man who's already given more than you ever will. Pressure mounted. Veteran advocacy groups organized petitions. Letters flooded the mayor's office. Local businesses posted signs declaring veteran-friendly, service dogs welcome. The American Legion chapter issued a formal statement. Our brothers and sisters fought for freedoms, including the right to move through public spaces with the assistance they require. Ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty. We stand with Master Sergeant Bill Austin. Even the governor's office weighed in, releasing a reminder that federal law protects the rights of service dog handlers in all public accommodations. It wasn't political, it was human decency. But perhaps the most powerful response came from those Bill had never met. One evening, Janet sat beside him on their porch, scrolling through her phone. Tears welled in her eyes. Bill, she said softly, handing him the screen. It was a video. A young man, maybe 25, stood in his kitchen, holding the leash of a black lab. Sergeant Austin, the man began, voice steady, but thick with emotion. I don't know you, but I know what it feels like to be stared at, to be questioned. My dog, Maggie, she keeps me breathing when the walls close in. I saw what happened to you, and I want you to know you weren't standing alone in that restaurant. You'll never stand alone. Bill watched the clip in silence. More videos followed. Mothers, fathers, wives of veterans, children holding up drawings of service dogs with capes. A quiet army of gratitude. Frank called later that night. His voice was rougher than usual. They're organizing something, Bill, not a protest, a presence. Bill raised an eyebrow. Presence? Frank chuckled. Veterans, service dog teams, folks who've been where you are. They're gathering at Red Rock next weekend, not to shout, just to sit, to show the world what dignity looks like. Bill wasn't sure what to say, but he knew what it meant. Meanwhile, Sierra's veneer was cracking. The more she pushed, the colder the public response became. Her social media accounts were flooded, not with threats, but with reminders of the lives touched by service dogs, by men and women like Bill. Her employer quietly severed ties. A local business where she had once been a spokesperson pulled her photos from their marketing, not out of cruelty, but because their own founders were veterans. In a final attempt to control the narrative, Sierra's attorney announced plans for a defamation lawsuit. It was a hollow threat. Public records, video evidence, and a community unwilling to be silenced left little room for spin. In private, Bill felt no joy in her downfall. I don't want her destroyed, he told Janet. I want her to understand, that's all. Not for me, for the next veteran who sits down at dinner and wonders if they'll be called disgusting just for existing. The week passed slowly, but the momentum didn't fade. By Friday evening, Red Rock's owner called Bill. He said, we've cleared a few tables for Sunday, it's your call, but folks are coming, veterans, families, not to protest, just to share a meal. You'll have your space. Quiet. Respectful, like it should have been from the start. Bill looked at Janet, she nodded, and with a deep breath, he said, "We'll be there." In the court of public opinion, Sierra Miller had already lost, but for Bill Austin, the real victory wasn't hers to give or take, it was the quiet reclaiming of space, the reaffirmation of dignity, not through outrage, but through presence, and as the world watched, a simple truth became undeniable: respect, once given freely, will not be taken quietly, not this time, not ever again. Sunday came quietly, the morning light filtered through the blinds of Bill Austin's modest home, painting the living room in soft gold. JP stretched at the foot of the couch, yawning in that slow, dignified way only old souls could. Bill sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, staring out at nothing in particular. It wasn't nerves, he'd faced far worse, but there was a weight to this day, not heavy, just significant. "Ready?" Janet asked, setting her mug down beside his. He gave a small nod. "As ready as I'll ever be." They didn't call it a rally or a protest or even a show of support, they called it what it was, a quiet thank you. At noon, Red Rock Seafood Grill opened its doors, no fanfare, no speeches, but the difference was felt the moment they stepped inside. The same corner table by the windows was reserved. JP settled beside Bill's chair like he always did, and around them the room filled slowly, men in faded ball caps, embroidered with unit patches, women with service pins on their lapels, families whose stories never made headlines, but whose sacrifices were woven into every quiet smile. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, it was presence. At one table, a young woman gently guided her father, his hand resting on her arm. His jacket hung loose on his frame, but his eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. At another, a group of veterans shared quiet laughs, their service dogs lying patiently beneath their chairs. The restaurant's usual hum was different today, more deliberate. Every glance toward Bill was met with a nod, a small gesture of respect. No one interrupted his meal, no one crowded him for stories, just simple acknowledgments. The owner, apron still dusted with flour, approached with 2 menus tucked under his arm, but he didn't hand them out. Instead, he offered his hand. "Glad to have you back, Sergeant Austin," he said. "This time we do it right." Bill stood slowly, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Thank you for this." A smile passed between them, the kind built on understanding, not obligation. The hours moved gently. No one mentioned Sierra Miller by name, no one needed to. The message had already been sent, not through outrage, but through the collective presence of people who understood what it meant to serve, and more importantly, what it meant to be seen. At one point, a young boy approached, maybe 9 or 10, clutching a crumpled drawing. He paused by Bill's chair, eyes wide, voice small. "Sir, this is for your dog." Bill took the paper carefully, a simple sketch of JP with a speech bubble that read, "I got your 6, his throat tightened. "Thank you, son," he said quietly. The boy beamed. His mother, standing a few feet away, gave Bill a soft nod. No words, just gratitude. Later, as coffee cups were refilled and conversations lingered, Frank leaned in across the table. "You know," he said, "you could have demanded a public apology, pressed charges, made a lot of noise." Bill smiled faintly. "Noise fades, dignity stays." Frank chuckled, "You and that quiet stubbornness," but deep down they both knew this wasn't about Sierra. This was bigger, a reminder that wounds aren't always visible, that some battles don't end when the uniform comes off, and that kindness, true kindness, doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, people began to trickle out. Some stopped by Bill's table, a handshake, a word of thanks, sometimes just a look. Janet watched her husband with quiet pride. He never wanted a spotlight, she'd said to Lisa earlier that week, but if his silence teaches someone to be better, then maybe that's the loudest statement of all. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed. The world kept moving, unaware of the small, significant gathering that had just taken place. Bill paused by the exit, resting a hand on JP's back. One of the servers, a young man with a nervous smile, held the door open. "Thank you for your service, sir," he said. Bill nodded. "Thank you for seeing it." The drive home was quiet. Janet's hand rested gently on his knee. JP's soft breaths filled the cabin of the truck. "I'm proud of you," she said. Bill didn't reply right away. "I didn't do anything special," he said finally. Janet smiled. "That's exactly why it matters." That night, back in the safety of their home, Bill sat on the porch as twilight settled in. JP lay beside him, head resting on his paws. The world had returned to its steady rhythm, but something had shifted. Bill wasn't naive. There would always be another Sierra Miller somewhere, another moment of ignorance, another careless comment, but now he knew, beyond the doubt, beyond the noise, that for every voice like hers, there were 100 more who understood, who respected, who remembered. Inside, the phone buzzed with messages Bill wouldn't read tonight. Tonight wasn't about statements or interviews. Tonight was about breathing, about sitting still, about being present. Janet joined him on the porch, her hands slipping into his. For a long moment, they said nothing. They didn't need to. Out in the yard, the wind stirred the chimes, soft and steady. Bill leaned back, feeling the familiar weight of JP's head against his boot, and with a deep breath, he smiled, because sometimes gratitude doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply stands quietly beside you, still, steady, unyielding, and that was enough. That would always be enough. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just Need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.